She trembled in chains, begging the cowboy, "Please don't leave me alone tonight." Sarah had never imagined that moving to a small rural town would feel so quiet, so empty, and at the same time so alive with possibilities. Life in the city had been loud, crowded, and suffocating, and when her aunt offered her a chance to help on her ranch, she had jumped at it without much thought. The town itself was tiny, with dusty roads that sparkled faintly under the sun, and fields stretching endlessly into the horizon. Birds sang in the morning, and the wind carried scents of hay, soil, and the faint smoke of distant chimneys. It was peaceful, yet somehow intimidating to someone who had spent her entire life surrounded by the hum of traffic and the flickering lights of a city that never slept. She had been living at the ranch for just a week, and already she felt a strange mix of exhaustion and excitement. Every day began before sunrise. She would step outside the small wooden cabin where she was staying, the sky painted in soft shades of orange and pink, and breathe in the crisp morning air. The farm smelled alive, full of animals stirring, horses neighing, and roosters crowing. It was a world she had only seen in books and old films, and now she was part of it. Jake, the cowboy who ran most of the ranch's daily operations, was a man of few words. His face was tanned and weathered from years under the sun, and his eyes had a calm, steady gaze that made people feel like everything was going to be okay, even when it wasn't. He had been polite but reserved when she first arrived, showing her the ropes of the ranch with a patient, almost gentle authority. Sarah respected him instantly, not just for his skill and experience, but for the quiet strength he seemed to carry effortlessly. The mornings were the hardest part for Sarah. She had never worked with animals or heavy equipment before, and there were times she felt completely out of her depth. The horses, though gentle, were unpredictable, and lifting heavy bales of hay left her arms trembling. Yet, despite her exhaustion, there was a thrill in learning something completely new. She liked the way the ranch made her feel alive, connected to the world in a way the city never had. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with streaks of gold and pink, Jake asked her to help him organize some of the old equipment in the barn.
The barn was massive, made of aged oak that smelled faintly of horses and dust.
Best. Tools and old machinery were stacked along the walls, remnants of years of work. Some items were clearly unused for decades, and a few even looked dangerous if handled carelessly. Sarah had to step carefully, mindful of rusted nails, squeaky boards, and loose tools.
"Be careful," Jake said in his low, calm voice, noticing the way she hesitated near a pile of old chains.
Some of this stuff isn't used anymore. Just keep your head and your hands in the right place." "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, trying to sound confident even though her stomach was fluttering nervously. They worked side by side, the sound of their movements mixing with the occasional whinny of the horses outside. Bess. Sarah found herself stealing glances at Jake. There was something reassuring about his presence, like a strong shield against the unknown. Respecting him into a few days, she felt safe around him in a way she hadn't felt in a long time.
As they moved deeper into the barn, she noticed a small section that seemed older than the rest.
Dust hung thick in the air, and cobwebs stretched across corners like delicate soap threads. There were old wooden crates, rusty tools, and a strange assortment of items that seemed to tell stories of a time long past. Sarah's curiosity got the better of her. She reached for a set of chains coiled neatly on a hook, marveling at how heavy and cold they felt in her hands. "These are old," Jake said, noticing her interest. "They were part of some farm equipment a long time ago." "But nothing dangerous. But they can get stuck if you're not careful."
Sarah nodded, feeling a shiver of excitement run down her spine.
There was something thrilling about holding something with history, something that had been used for years and forgotten. She didn't think much of it, not knowing that this small, seemingly harmless action was about to change the night entirely. Outside, the wind had begun to pick up. The calm evening air was giving way to a distant rumble of thunder. Clouds rolled in, heavy and gray, covering the last streaks of sunset.
Sarah didn't notice it at first, too engrossed in exploring the barn's dusty corners.
But soon, the sound of rain tapping against the barn roof reached her ears. She looked up and saw the first drops falling, cool and steady, soaking the wooden shingles. Jake glanced at the sky. "Looks like a storm is coming," he said. But his calm tone didn't hide the concern in his eyes.
We might be here a while if it gets bad. Sarah nodded, trying not to let her worry show.
She was fascinated by storms, the way they transformed everything, the sky, the sound, the smell of wet earth. But something about being trapped in a barn, surrounded by old equipment, made her stomach twist nervously. As the rain began to fall harder, Sarah decided to move a large coiled chain from the hook to a nearby crate. Her hand slipped, and the chain swung slightly, brushing against her wrist. Before she could react, it caught around her arm. She tugged gently, thinking she could free herself easily. But it tightened, and she realized with a sudden, sharp panic that it wouldn't budge. Her heart raced, and she tried not to scream, not wanting to startle the animals or alarm Jake. But the reality was clear. Her wrist was trapped, and the chain was heavy. She twisted and pulled, each movement making her more anxious. The barn, which had seemed so safe and welcoming a few moments ago, suddenly felt confining and cold. "Jake!" she called, her voice trembling. I can't get free." Jake was immediately at her side, his calm presence grounding her. He examined the chain carefully, his hands steady as he assessed the situation. "Best. It's okay, Sarah. Don't panic." "We'll get this off you." Sarah's chest heaved as the storm outside grew louder. The barn shook slightly under the wind and rain, the sound echoing through the wooden beams. She felt a shiver run down her spine, not from the cold, but from the fear of being stuck and alone. Bet. Her eyes met Jake's, and she felt a sudden surge of vulnerability. "Please, don't leave me alone tonight," she whispered, her voice breaking. Jake placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder.
I'm not going anywhere, he said firmly.
"You're safe. Just hold on and we'll get this chain off." The tension in the barn was thick, the storm outside mirroring the fear and uncertainty inside. But even in that moment of fear, Sarah felt a strange sense of trust. Jake was calm, focused, and determined, and his presence reminded her that she wasn't alone. Minutes felt like hours as they worked together to free her wrist. The sound of rain pounding against the roof, and the occasional rumble of thunder filling the silence. Fast. Sarah's fear slowly began to give way to relief as she realized that help was close, that someone cared enough to stay and see her through this moment. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jake managed to lift the chain and free her wrist. Sarah rubbed her arm, feeling both pain and relief. Her hands shook, and she took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. Just take it easy." Sarah nodded, feeling tears of gratitude well up. She realized that this small incident, frightening as it had been, had changed something in her. She had faced fear, and she had been met with kindness, patience, and protection. It was a lesson she would carry with her, a memory of trust and courage she had never expected to find in a barn on a rainy evening. As the storm raged outside, the barn became a place of safety rather than fear. Sarah settled onto a nearby crate, still shaking slightly, but feeling a strange warmth in her chest. The wind howled and the rain continued to pour, but inside, with Jake by her side, she felt a sense of calm. She realized that life on the ranch was full of unexpected moments, moments that could be frightening, exhausting, but also profoundly meaningful. And that night, as the storm carried on outside, Sarah understood something she had never truly believed before. That trust could grow in the most unexpected places, and courage could be found not just in heroic deeds, but in quiet, steady support during the hardest moments. The storm outside continued through the night, relentless in its pounding rain and occasional rumbles of distant thunder. Sarah sat on the old wooden crate, her wrists still sore from the chain incident, but the warmth of Jake's presence beside her made the barn feel safer. She watched as the shadows of the storm danced across the walls, and she realized how alone she would have felt if he hadn't been there.
Every flash of lightning illuminated the interior, casting eerie shapes over the old equipment and dusty corners.
It was beautiful and frightening at the same time. Sarah's mind wandered as she thought about the strange chain and the unexpected danger it had caused. She had never been in a situation like this before, feeling both fear and relief in such a raw, immediate way.
Her heart still raced at the memory of being trapped, even though she was free now.
She glanced at Jake, who was quietly inspecting some old tools near the corner. His calm, methodical movements were reassuring, almost hypnotic in their steadiness.
I didn't expect this when I came here, Sarah admitted quietly, almost to herself. I thought working on a ranch would just be work. Hard work, but safe work.
I didn't think I'd feel so scared.
Jake glanced at her, his eyes softening.
Fear is normal, he said. It's how we react when we don't know what's coming.
But the important thing is that you're still here, and you handled it. Sarah nodded, feeling a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment.
She had always prided herself on being independent, but this night reminded her that sometimes it was okay to need help. She wasn't used to letting someone else take care of her, yet she realized she trusted Jake in a way that surprised her. The rain intensified, drumming against the barn roof like a steady heartbeat. The wind howled, rattling the wooden boards and sending small splinters of hay fluttering through the air. Best. Sarah hugged her arms around her knees, trying to calm the residual tremble in her body. Every shadow seemed to move, and every creak of the old barn made her heart skip a beat. Bay. Jake, sensing her unease, moved closer and sat on a nearby crate. He didn't say much, but his presence was enough to anchor her. Bay. He reached for a lantern that had been hanging nearby and lit it, casting a warm, steady glow across the barn. The soft light made the space feel more like a sanctuary than a trap, and Sarah felt her tension ease slightly. "Better?" Jake asked. "Much," she replied, managing a small smile. For a few minutes, they sat in silence, listening to the storm. Sarah tried to focus on the sound of the rain and the occasional rumble of thunder, finding a strange comfort in the chaos outside. It reminded her that storms, like life, could be sudden and intense, but they always passed. Then, as she adjusted her position on the crate, Sarah noticed something peculiar. A small, locked box, tucked behind a stack of old wooden crates, had gone unnoticed until now. It was worn and scratched, clearly very old, but there was something about it that drew her attention. Her curiosity overcame her lingering fear. "What's this?" she asked, pointing to the box. Jake looked over, his brow furrowed. "Oh, that," he said. "It's been here for years. Old family keepsakes, mostly. Nothing important, really. Best to leave it alone." Sarah tilted her head. "Bert, are you sure?" "It looks..." Bashan. Jake gave a small shrug.
It's your call, but I'd be careful. Be careful. Some things are better left where they are. Despite his warning, Sarah couldn't resist.
There was something about the mystery of the box, about uncovering something from the past while the storm raged outside, that thrilled her. She reached for it carefully, her fingers brushing against the cold, rough surface. The lock was old but simple, and with a bit of effort, it clicked open. Inside, she found a collection of letters and photographs, yellowed with age.
The handwriting was elegant, flowing, and clearly belonged to someone who had lived decades ago. Sarah carefully lifted a letter, unfolding it with reverence.
It was addressed to a woman named Clara, and the words spoke of longing, fear, and hope. The emotions were raw and timeless, as though the writer's heart had been captured perfectly on the paper. Pshh. Jake watched her quietly. "Those are old letters from my grandmother," he said softly. Breath. She wrote to a man she loved, someone who was away a lot. It's complicated, but it's a piece of our family history.
Sarah was fascinated.
Bragg. The letters seemed almost alive in her hands. They spoke of human emotions that transcended time. Love, fear, loneliness, and trust. She couldn't help but feel a strange connection to the writer, imagining the emotions that had gone into each carefully penned word.
You can read them if you want, Jake said, as if sensing her curiosity.
Bass. Just don't let them get wet. Bass. The storm could ruin them.
Sarah nodded, carefully setting the letters on her lap.
Bet. She began reading, and with each line she felt as though she was peeking into a life long gone, a story frozen in time. The words were filled with emotion, and she found herself smiling, sighing, and even holding back tears at different moments. It was incredible how the past could feel so immediate, so human, even after so many years. Hours passed unnoticed as Sarah read the letters. Breath. The storm outside continued its relentless rhythm, but inside the barn a different kind of storm was brewing. One of curiosity, connection, and growing trust.
Sarah felt herself opening up in ways she hadn't anticipated.
"Do you ever think about the people who lived here before?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake nodded.
All the time. That's why I keep some of these things.
They remind me where I come from, and they teach me a lot about patience, resilience, love.
Sarah looked up from the letters, meeting his steady gaze.
"I think I understand," she said. It's like, even though the storm is scary, there's something comforting about knowing someone else experienced something too. Something difficult, maybe even dangerous, but they got through it."
Psh. Jake smiled faintly. Exactly. A sudden crash of thunder made Sarah jump.
Breath. She held her hands over her heart, feeling her pulse race. Jake laughed softly, a warm, reassuring sound.
You'll get used to it, he said. Storms aren't as scary when you know you're safe.
I hope so, Sarah replied, still trembling slightly.
But tonight was too close.
I can't stop thinking about what could have happened if you weren't here.
You would have managed, Jake said. You're stronger than you think. But I'm glad I was here too. Sometimes that's just how life works. People helping each other when they need it most. Bait. Sarah felt a lump in her throat. She hadn't realized how deeply the events of the evening had affected her. She had felt fear, helplessness, and vulnerability, but she had also felt safety, trust, and gratitude.
It was an emotional roller coaster, and she wasn't sure how to process it all.
As the storm began to wane, the rain slowing to a gentle patter, Sarah and Jake carefully put the letters back in the box. She felt a strange sense of closure, as though reading them had prepared her for what was to come. The barn no longer felt ominous. Instead, it felt like a sanctuary, a place where fear could be confronted and trust could grow.
I think I understand why you warned me about the box, Sarah said.
Bay. It's not just about keeping it safe. It's about respecting the past, isn't it? Jake nodded. Bay.
Everything here has a story. Every tool, every letter, every chain. They're all pieces of lives lived before us.
Treat them with care, and they'll teach you more than you expect. Sarah smiled, feeling a sense of accomplishment and maturity she hadn't known before. The night had started with fear and uncertainty, but it had evolved into something much more meaningful. She had faced danger, felt trust, and discovered the depth of human connection, even across generations. By the time the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky, Sarah was exhausted but exhilarated. She knew she would never forget this night. The storm, the chains, the letters, and the quiet presence of the cowboy who had stayed by her side. It was a night that had changed her, teaching her lessons about fear, courage, and the unexpected ways people could support each other. Buress. And as she finally settled into a quiet corner of the barn, watching the rain drip from the roof and listening to the soft sounds of animals waking, Sarah realized that even in moments of terror and uncertainty, there could be beauty, connection, and hope. The night had been terrifying, yes, but it had also been unforgettable. And it had only just begun to shape the person she was becoming. The storm had finally passed, leaving the world outside the barn soaked and glistening under the early morning light. Puddles reflected the pale sky, and the air was filled with the fresh scent of rain-soaked earth. Sarah stepped outside carefully, her boots sinking slightly into the wet soil. Everything seemed calmer now, peaceful even. But the memory of the night before, the chain, the fear, the storm, still lingered in her mind. She shook her head, trying to push away the lingering tension, but it clung stubbornly. Jake was already outside, checking on the horses, his movements calm and precise. He had a way of working that made even the most daunting tasks look effortless. Sarah watched him for a moment, appreciating his quiet competence. She had never met someone so steady, so reliable, and in a way that steadiness had become her anchor during the previous night's chaos. "Morning," she said softly, approaching him. "Morning," Jake replied, nodding. He gave a small smile that made Sarah feel both comforted and slightly shy. There was no awkwardness between them, only a sense of trust that had grown stronger overnight. They moved together around the barn, checking on the animals, making sure everything had weathered the storm. Horses shook the rain from their coats, snorted softly, and flicked their tails. Chickens clucked nervously as they searched for dry spots. It was routine work, but after the intense events of the previous night, every small task felt significant. Sarah felt as though she was seeing the ranch with new eyes. The work was not just labor. It was life, survival, and care, all rolled into one.
After a while, Jake suggested they take a break and walk around the property.
The ground was still wet, but the sky was clearing, and a soft golden light illuminated the fields. Sarah followed him, her curiosity renewed. The storm had changed the landscape slightly. Leaves were bent, branches scattered, and small streams had formed where none existed before. It was a reminder of how fragile and unpredictable life could be, how quickly calm could turn into chaos, and how important it was to be prepared and aware.
As they walked, Sarah's mind kept returning to the chain incident.
She couldn't shake the memory of the panic, the trapped feeling, and the overwhelming relief when Jake had stayed by her side. It had been terrifying, yes, but it had also been transformative. She realized that fear had a way of exposing her limits, showing her where she was vulnerable and where she could find strength. And, more importantly, it had shown her who she could trust. "Jake," she began hesitantly, I want to understand more about the ranch." Bays.
About you! About how you've managed to handle all of this for so long.
Jake looked at her thoughtfully. "It's not easy," he said. "Ranch life is hard work, and it requires patience, persistence, and respect for everything around you. People, animals, land. I've had my share of mistakes, of nights like last night where I wasn't sure how things would turn out. But you learn to take it one step at a time, to be careful, and to be responsible for those around you. Sarah nodded, absorbing his words. There was something inspiring about his perspective, a quiet wisdom that came from years of experience. She realized that life on the ranch was more than just physical labor. It was a lesson in resilience, empathy, and human connection. As they continued walking, Jake pointed out areas of the property, explaining how the land was used, how the animals were cared for, and how every tool and structure had its place. Sarah listened intently, fascinated by the depth of knowledge required to manage a ranch effectively. She asked questions, and Jake answered patiently, never making her feel ignorant or slow. His teaching style was gentle but firm, encouraging her to learn while still respecting the traditions and practices of the ranch. By mid-morning, they returned to the barn. Jake suggested they organize the equipment properly, something they had started the night before. Sarah hesitated for a moment, still remembering the chain, but she pushed the fear aside. She was determined not to let one frightening experience prevent her from learning and growing. As they worked, Sarah noticed a pile of old ropes and chains that had been overlooked. She picked one up carefully, testing its weight and flexibility. Jake watched her, his expression neutral but attentive. Be careful with that, he warned.
It's old and worn, but it can still cause injury if used carelessly.
I will, Sarah replied, gripping it firmly but gently. As she worked, she thought about the letters she had read the night before.
The emotions in them, fear, longing, hope, and love, were not so different from what she had experienced. Fear was universal, timeless, and it had a way of shaping people, testing their courage and resilience. She felt a strange kinship with the past, realizing that life, in all its unpredictability, had always demanded strength, patience, and trust. Suddenly, a noise from outside caught her attention. A sharp, unexpected crack. She froze, her heart jumping. Jake immediately looked toward the sound, moving quickly but calmly. Sarah felt a wave of fear rush over her again, but this time it was tempered by the knowledge that Jake was there, that she was not alone.
It's probably just a branch, Jake said after a moment, though his eyes remained vigilant.
The storm loosened a few trees. Nothing to worry about. Sarah nodded, trying to calm her racing heart. She took a deep breath, focusing on the rhythm of her breathing, on the feeling of her hands gripping the rope, and on the steady presence of Jake nearby. The fear was still there, lingering, but it was no longer paralyzing. She realized that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was acting in spite of it. The morning passed with hard work and careful attention to detail. Sarah found herself growing more confident with each task. She could handle the equipment, manage the animals, and navigate the challenges of the barn without the same trembling anxiety she had felt the night before. Jake offered guidance when needed, but allowed her space to learn, reinforcing her confidence and independence. By afternoon, they took a break under the shelter of the barn. Sunlight filtered through the gaps in the wooden walls, casting warm golden beams across the floor. Sarah sat quietly, reflecting on the events of the past 24 hours. She realized how much she had grown in such a short time. The storm, the chain, the fear. It had all been part of a lesson she hadn't expected to learn. "Jake," she said softly, "I never thought I could feel so different after just one night." "Last night scared me, but it also made me stronger, I think." Jake looked at her, a faint smile playing on his lips. "That's the way it works," he said. "Life tests you, and sometimes the hardest experiences teach you the most." You learn about yourself, about courage, and about the people who truly care. Sarah nodded, feeling the truth of his words deep in her heart. She had discovered a resilience she hadn't known existed, and she had learned the value of trust, patience, and support. The bond she felt with Jake was no longer just admiration. It was respect, gratitude, and a quiet understanding that they could rely on each other when life became unpredictable. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, they continued their work, but there was a new energy in Sarah's movements. She was more deliberate, more confident, and more aware of her surroundings. Every task became an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to demonstrate the strength she had found within herself.
Later, while stacking hay near the edge of the barn, Sarah noticed something strange, a small gap in the floorboards partially hidden under a pile of hay.
Curious, she moved closer and peered inside. There was a faint, musty smell, and she could see something dark and wooden beneath the boards. Her curiosity was immediate, but so was a sense of caution. "Jake!" she called, her voice steady but cautious. "Something under the floorboards here. I think it's part of the old barn structure. Or maybe something else."
Jake came over, examining the area carefully.
He knelt down and inspected the gap. He murmured. "Looks like a hidden compartment. Could be old tools, supplies, or something from years ago. But we'll have to be careful opening it." Sarah felt a thrill of excitement mixed with apprehension. The barn seemed to hold endless mysteries, each corner and crevice telling a story from the past. She realized that life on the ranch was not just about physical work. It was about uncovering the layers of history, understanding the lives that had come before, and learning to navigate both fear and curiosity responsibly. Together, they carefully lifted the boards, revealing a small wooden box similar to the one Sarah had discovered the night before. Des Bait. Inside were more old letters, photographs, and small trinkets that seemed to tell a personal story. Sarah handled them gently, aware of their age and fragility. The letters spoke of family, friendship, and challenges faced long ago. As they read through the notes, Sarah felt a deep connection to the people who had lived on the land before her. She realized that life was a continuum, that courage, fear, and trust were constants across generations. The experience reinforced what she had learned during the storm, that vulnerability could coexist with strength, and that moments of fear could become moments of profound growth. By the time evening approached, Sarah and Jake had returned everything to its place, organized and safe. The barn, once a place of fear and uncertainty, now felt like a sanctuary, a space of learning and trust. But Sarah felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing she had faced her fears, gained knowledge, and strengthened her resilience. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the wet fields, Sarah realized something important. Life would continue to bring storms, literal and figurative, but she now had the tools to face them. Courage wasn't about never being afraid. It was about acting, learning, and trusting others, even when fear was present. And as she looked at Jake, who quietly tended to the animals with unwavering focus, Sarah felt a sense of gratitude and connection she had never known before. The turning point of the night. The chain, the storm, the letters had changed her. She wasn't the same person who had stepped into the barn just 24 hours ago. She was stronger, wiser, and more aware of the bonds that could be formed in the most unexpected circumstances. The days after the storm were quiet, but for Sarah the events of that night lingered like a shadow she could not shake. The barn, once just a workspace, had become a symbol of fear, trust, and resilience. Every creak of the wooden floorboards, every rustle of hay in the breeze reminded her of how fragile life could feel and how quickly circumstances could change. She found herself thinking often about the chain, the storm, and the letters, and how much they had shifted her perception of herself and the world around her. B. Sarah's mornings began earlier than usual, not because she had to work, but because she felt drawn to the routine of the ranch. There was a rhythm to the place, a rhythm that demanded attention, patience, and care. Horses needed feeding, stalls needed cleaning, and fields needed inspection. Each task, no matter how small, carried significance. Sarah had learned to approach them with diligence and focus. But underneath her concentration, her mind often wandered back to the night she had felt trapped and vulnerable. Jake noticed the subtle changes in her demeanor. Best. She was quieter at times, thoughtful, her eyes lingering on details she might have missed before.
He didn't comment immediately, letting her process at her own pace, but he observed with a careful attentiveness.
Jake knew that Sarah's experience had left an impression deeper than the surface. It wasn't just the fear, it was the lesson, the emotional impact, and the way it had shifted her sense of trust and self-reliance. One afternoon, as they repaired a broken fence along the eastern pasture, Sarah broke the silence. "Jake," she began cautiously, "I keep thinking about last night and how scared I was. I can't believe how quickly things changed from normal to so frightening." Psst. Jake nodded, hammering a nail into the fence post with precision. "It happens," he said. Life can turn in an instant. What matters is how you respond and what you take from it. You learned something important about yourself, and that's something no one can take away from you." Sarah sighed, running her fingers along the rough wooden post. "I know, but it's more than that. I keep thinking, what if something else happens? Something I can't handle?" I felt so helpless. Jake looked at her, his eyes calm and reassuring. Feeling helpless is natural. The trick is to not let it define you. You have to accept that fear exists, but also realize that help and support are always around if you allow it. Trust isn't just about others. It's about trusting yourself, too. Beck. Sarah nodded slowly. His words resonated deeply. She realized that her fear was not a weakness. It was a signal, a reminder that she needed to be aware, careful, and prepared. But it was also proof of her courage, of the way she had faced danger and emerged stronger. Over the next few days, Sarah found herself more alert, more mindful of her surroundings, and more confident in her abilities. As she approached her work on the ranch with renewed energy, not just following instructions, but thinking critically about every task. Feeding the horses, tending to the smaller animals, and organizing equipment became exercises in responsibility and awareness. Every small success reinforced her growing sense of competence and resilience. But the emotional fallout of that stormy night was not just internal. Sarah noticed subtle changes in her interactions with others. She had grown more introspective, and at times she preferred to work quietly, processing her thoughts. She was still social, laughing and talking with Jake and a few locals, but there was a depth to her presence now, an awareness that she hadn't possessed before. People noticed it, even if they didn't understand it fully. Jake continued to be a steady presence. He never pushed her to talk about her fears, but he was always there, patient and supportive. Their bond deepened, not in a dramatic or romantic way, but in the kind of quiet, unspoken trust that forms when someone proves themselves reliable in moments of vulnerability. Sarah realized that trust could be built silently, through actions rather than words, and that the strength of a relationship was often measured in how well people supported each other during challenges. One morning, while gathering firewood near the edge of the property, Sarah stumbled upon a small, hidden stream that had formed from the storm's runoff. She knelt beside it, dipping her hands into the cold, clear water. But the gentle flow and the soft sound of water moving over rocks had a calming effect on her. She thought about the storm, the fear, the uncertainty, the chain, and realized how far she had come in just a few days. She was no longer paralyzed by the memory of danger. Instead, she carried it as a reminder of her own courage and resilience. Jake approached quietly, carrying a bundle of firewood. "You found the stream," he said, smiling. "It's been a long time since I saw anyone notice it. Most people just rush past it." Sarah looked up, feeling a smile tug at her lips. "Psst, psst. I guess I'm more aware now," she admitted. "After everything that happened, I notice things differently." Bayef, even small things feel significant. Jake nodded. "That's good," he said. "Life is made of small moments. How you handle them matters just as much as how you handle the big ones." Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with shades of orange and pink, Sarah and Jake returned to the barn to secure the animals for the night. The barn smelled of hay and animals, familiar and comforting. As they worked, Sarah noticed the chain that had caused so much fear the night before. It was coiled neatly on its hook, looking harmless in the daylight. She approached it cautiously, but with a new sense of confidence. "Jake," she said softly.
I want to make sure I know how to handle these things safely.
I don't want to feel helpless again.
Jake smiled, appreciating her determination.
Good,
he said, Bray. "It's important to learn. Handling equipment safely is part of responsibility. You've already learned about fear and trust. Now it's time to learn about preparation and skill." Together, they reviewed safety procedures, tested equipment, and practiced handling the chains and ropes under Jake's watchful eye. Sarah felt her confidence growing with each careful movement. The fear that had once gripped her so tightly was now replaced with focus, awareness, and a quiet determination. She realized that preparation was not just about skill. It was about mental readiness, about anticipating challenges and knowing she had the strength to meet them. As night fell, the ranch grew quiet. The wind rustled the trees, and the animals settled into their stalls. Sarah stood near the barn's entrance, looking out over the fields. The memory of the storm was still there, but it no longer terrified her. Instead, it reminded her of how much she had grown, how much she had learned, and how much trust and courage mattered in life. Jake joined her, carrying a lantern that cast warm light across the barnyard. "You've come a long way," he said. "I'm proud of how you handled everything." Sarah felt a wave of gratitude and humility. "Thank you," she said. "I couldn't have done it without your guidance and your presence." Jake nodded, a quiet understanding passing between them. They didn't need many words. The bond forged through shared experience and trust spoke louder than anything else. Sarah realized that life on the ranch was not just about work. It was about learning, growing, and forming connections that could withstand challenges. The next morning, Sarah awoke with a renewed sense of purpose. She moved through her tasks with confidence, aware of the lessons she had learned, and determined to carry them forward. The storm had left its mark, but it had also left her stronger, more aware, and more connected to the world around her. As the days passed, Sarah's transformation became more evident. She was still learning, still growing, but she no longer felt paralyzed by fear. She had discovered resilience within herself, the importance of trust, and the value of human connection. The storm, the chain, and the letters were no longer just memories. They were milestones in her journey, markers of growth, courage, and understanding. And as Sarah looked out over the sunlit fields, the barn behind her, and Jake working quietly nearby, she understood that life was full of unexpected challenges. Some were small, some were frightening, but each carried lessons, opportunities, and the chance to become stronger. She had faced fear, built trust, and learned resilience. and those lessons would stay with her, guiding her through whatever storms might come in the future. The days turned into weeks, and life on the ranch began to settle into a familiar rhythm. The storm that had caused fear and uncertainty was now only a memory, but the lessons it brought stayed with Sarah. Every morning she woke to the sound of roosters crowing, horses moving in their stalls, and the gentle rustle of the wind through the trees. Life felt steady now, predictable in its rhythm, yet full of small surprises that reminded her that the world was alive, ever-changing, and always demanding awareness. Sarah had grown more confident. Tasks that once felt daunting, feeding the animals, organizing the barn, managing the equipment, were now approached with focus and care. Her movements were deliberate, her mind alert, and her heart steadier. She still remembered the fear from the night of the storm, the chains that had trapped her, and the pounding rain that had echoed against the barn walls. But those memories were no longer paralyzing. They were empowering. They reminded her of how much she had learned about herself, about trust, and about resilience. Jake continued to be her guide, not as a teacher in the strictest sense, but as a steady presence who offered support, patience, and understanding. He never pressured her or demanded her attention. Instead, he allowed her to grow at her own pace. The bond between them had strengthened, built on trust, respect, and shared experiences. It was quiet, unspoken, and meaningful. Sarah felt a deep sense of gratitude for his guidance, knowing that she would not have grown as quickly or as fully without it. One bright morning, Sarah stood at the edge of the pasture, looking over the rolling fields, golden in the early sunlight. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of hay, earth, and dew. She reflected on her journey, the storm, the chain, the letters, and the countless small tasks she had accomplished. Each experience had taught her something valuable about life, fear, and courage. She realized that the true lessons were not just about surviving the storm, but about learning to navigate life's uncertainties with awareness, patience, and trust. Jake approached, carrying a small basket of feed for the animals. "Morning," he said, smiling gently. "Morning," Sarah replied. She felt a quiet joy in the routine of the ranch, a sense of belonging that she had never experienced before. "Ready to check the east pasture?" Jake asked. "We need to make sure the fences are secure after the storm runoff."
Sarah nodded.
"I'm ready." As they walked together, she noticed the small changes the storm had brought to the land. Puddles had dried, leaving soft, fertile soil. Branches and debris had been cleared, and the animals were adapting to the new terrain with ease.
Sarah realized that the storm had not just tested them, it had reshaped the ranch, revealing areas that needed attention, teaching lessons about care, preparation, and resilience. While repairing a section of fence that had been weakened, Sarah's mind wandered to the letters she had discovered in the barn. They had connected her to the past in a profound way, reminding her that human emotions, love, fear, hope, and perseverance were timeless. But she understood that life on the ranch was not just about labor. It was about connection, awareness, and responsibility both to the land and to the people around her.
"Jake," she said softly, "I keep thinking about those letters."
The people who wrote them, they faced challenges, fears, and moments of uncertainty, just like we do now.
I think that's why they feel so real to me. Jake nodded thoughtfully. Exactly. People's stories carry lessons, even long after they've passed. The important part is to take those lessons and apply them to your own life. That's what makes them meaningful. Sarah considered his words, feeling a deep sense of clarity. She realized that her own experiences, the storm, the chain, the fear, were now part of her story. They had shaped her, strengthened her, and given her insight into her own courage and resilience. By midday, they returned to the barn to organize tools and equipment. Sarah moved with a sense of purpose, carefully stacking ropes, cleaning the floors and ensuring everything was in its proper place. Jake watched her quietly, impressed by her growth. Burst.
You've come a long way, he said. You're learning not just the work, but the responsibility that comes with it.
That's what matters most. Sarah smiled, feeling a sense of pride she hadn't known before.
I never thought I could handle this, she admitted. But now I see that fear isn't the enemy. It's a guide. It tells you where you need to grow, what you need to learn, and who you can trust.
Jake nodded. Well said. That's an important lesson.
Fear is natural. Courage is acting in spite of it. Trust is knowing you don't have to face it alone. The afternoon passed with quiet work and occasional conversation. Sarah found herself reflecting on the past few weeks, the stormy night, the challenges, and the moments of fear, and realizing how much they had changed her. She had discovered resilience, patience, and trust. She had learned to rely on herself while also recognizing the value of support from others. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of pink and gold, Sarah and Jake took a moment to sit on the barn steps. The animals were calm, the fields glowing in the last light of day, and the barn seemed peaceful, almost sacred in its quiet presence. "Do you ever think about the future?" Sarah asked, her voice thoughtful. Jake considered the question.
I do, he said, but I try to focus on what I can do today.
Tomorrow will come with its own challenges. What matters is that you're prepared, aware, and ready to face them. Sarah nodded, understanding the wisdom in his words. She realized that life would always bring storms, literal and metaphorical, but that her experiences had equipped her to handle them. The fear she had felt was no longer a chain holding her back. It was a reminder of her strength, her courage, and her ability to grow. As darkness settled over the ranch, Sarah helped secure the animals and prepare the barn for the night. The tasks were familiar now, almost comforting in their routine. She felt a sense of accomplishment, knowing that she had faced her fears, learned from them, and emerged stronger. After finishing her work, Sarah took a moment to stand outside, looking up at the stars. The night was calm, the air cool and fresh. She thought about the storm that had tested her, the chain that had trapped her, and the letters that had connected her to the past. Each moment had been significant, shaping her into a stronger, more aware person. "I've learned so much," she whispered to herself, but not just about the ranch, but about life, about fear, courage, trust, and growth. Jake appeared beside her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You have," he said quietly. "And you'll continue to learn." That's the beauty of life. It keeps teaching us, if we're willing to pay attention. Sarah smiled, feeling a deep sense of peace. She realized that the lessons of the past weeks were not just temporary. They were tools she would carry with her for the rest of her life. Fear could still appear, storms could still come, but now she had the strength, awareness, and trust to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The next morning, Sarah woke early as she had been doing, but with a new sense of purpose. She moved through her tasks with confidence, efficiency, and mindfulness. The barn, the animals, and the land all seemed more alive, more meaningful. She approached each task not just as work, but as an opportunity to apply the lessons she had learned. Patience, care, awareness, and courage. By the end of the week, Sarah had grown into a confident, capable, and resilient young woman. The events of the stormy night, which once seemed terrifying, were now a source of strength and wisdom. She had faced fear, learned to trust, and discovered her own resilience. She understood the importance of preparation, observation, and responsibility, and she carried these lessons into every task she performed. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the ranch was bathed in golden light, Sarah and Jake stood together, looking over the fields. The air was calm, the animals settled, and the world seemed at peace. Sarah felt a deep sense of gratitude for the lessons she had learned, the trust she had gained, and the bond she had formed with Jake. "Thank you," she said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. "For everything. For staying with me, for guiding me, and for teaching me to face fear instead of running from it." Jake smiled a warm and genuine expression. "You did all the work," he said. "I just helped you see what you are capable of. You learned the lessons, and now they're yours to carry forward." Sarah felt a sense of closure, of accomplishment, and of readiness. She had faced the storm, both literal and metaphorical, and had come through stronger, wiser, and more self-aware. The experience had transformed her, not just on the surface, but in the very core of who she was. As night fell over the ranch, Sarah knew that life would continue to bring challenges. There would be storms, there would be moments of fear, and there would be times when she felt vulnerable. But she also knew that she had the strength, courage, and trust to face whatever came her way. The lessons of the stormy night, the chains and the letters would stay with her forever, guiding her, shaping her, and reminding her of the resilience that had always been within her. And as she turned to help Jake close the barn doors for the night, Sarah felt a sense of peace, fulfillment, and readiness for whatever the future might hold. Life on the ranch had taught her fear, courage, trust, and growth. Most importantly, it had taught her that even in the most difficult moments, there was always a way forward, a path shaped by patience, awareness, and resilience.